Hello and welcome to Chapter 1 of the Human Resource course. My name is Kevin Matthews, as it said in the beginning of the video. So basically what we're going to talk about in this is sort of the role of human resources. The book actually, when they talk about this topic in here, in this chapter, I actually think is pretty well organized in the way that they do it. And the first thing that we're going to discuss, well, the first thing that ends up happening is you have this portion of where it shows you, kind of the what it's like to be in the human resource, function as you're going through the work. I'm not going to go over that because hopefully through this entire course, what will end up happening is that I'll be sharing enough. So the first thing that we're going to do is that we're going to explain the role of HRM in organizations, and then we're going to define and discuss some major HRM topics. And so one of the things that I like about this, they said every organization, large or small, uses a variety of capital to make its business work. Forgive me for a second, take off my HR hat, put on my accountant hat. We tend to think of things when we talk of assets, and if you've ever taken a basic accounting course, you kind of know this. An asset is basically, a thing that provides future economic value. And I always like it that, one of the things I've kind of translated from my accounting knowledge to my human resource knowledge that I've had is that always looking at people as being assets as opposed to being costs, which is what some managers tend to do. And it's unfortunate because usually when that happens, it's because they don't have a whole lot of faith in their people. That's kind of our job, is to give senior management the understanding that our people are really our most valuable assets that we have in the organization. And of course, it always depends on the organization that you work for. But I'm hard pressed to find an organization where people are not valuable, or where people are a problem. Maybe, I'd wouldn't even hazard a guess. But generally, any organization that we all work within, we're going to have the opportunity to work with those people and develop them and make them better. So I say, what is HRM? And I'm going to read this right out of the book because I think that it's got some value. Human resource management is the process of employing people, training them, compensating them, developing policies related to them, and developing strategies to retain them. One of the things I love about that sentence is, first of all, it's pretty encompassing, but the second thing is it hits pretty much everything. I mean, each chapter, has its own thing. Process of employing people is going to be recruiting, training them, compensating them, developing policies, which is going to be your retention, or not retention, but your selections and your legal aspects of it, and then developing strategies to retain them. The only thing that is not in that definition that I really wish was more in that definition was the aspect of safety. It's kind of funny, safety's kind of fallen into HR. When I was in the Navy, safety was just as important as any other department head. In fact, the night top safety officer was usually the first place that a pilot would go to when he first checked in the squadron as a department head. And usually if things went well in that position, he could do very well for himself. So hopefully, over time, there's, safety will become a much more important thing. But anyways, I digress. So, and then there's another thing that's in here. And Jack Welch, who's the former CEO of GE, I mean, a lot of people like to talk about him because I think he's very famous when it comes to management and how management, how people manage organizations. But, and there's a lot of things that he does that I don't agree with, and I'm not going to get into that because this isn't a Jack Welch commercial. But one of the things, this actually I do kind of agree with, is when he talks about the new role of HRM in today's world, he says, get out of the parties and birthdays and enrollment forms. Remember, HR is important in good times and defined in hard times. I have witnessed good times and bad times with HR organizations, whether I am working in HR or I'm working in another function of the organization. I spent some time, working in the restaurant industry for about 9 years before finishing college and eventually, joining the Navy. But in my 9 years, the way that human resources behaved and pursued things defined a lot of stuff about it. And if HR was successful in the good times and the bad times, it's usually, like they said, it's defined in the hard times, because we have a very large function to fulfill in the good times and the bad times. You know, and you'll see it if you ever get into, if you work in any of the number of functions. I remember, actually, let me maybe if I tell this story, this actually works better. I remember back in 2000, one of my professors was actually late for class. I know it happens every now and then. But the professor came to us and he said, I'm really sorry I was late for class. I was out at, giving a speech at this Chamber of Commerce luncheon. And one of the students said, well, what was the speech about? And he said, well, it's about retention and recruiting. Because right now, recruiting is probably one of the hardest jobs to be in, because the economy is doing so well that nobody can find, the jobs are plentiful, but people aren't. And so it's getting that talent, retaining that talent. Maybe 2-3 years later, I had attended a luncheon down in Florida where they were talking about how to break the bad news is you're going to let people go. Because that's, once 2002, 2003 happened, we started having some economic difficulties. And so that caused a little bit, caused more issues. And then I've seen it go back up where, around 2006, 2005, 2006, started getting good again. And then, of course, 2008, and really until probably around 2012, it was a lot of the same things that we saw in the downside. So you're going to have cycles. There's nothing you can do about that. And so, we have to be ready to perform in each of those cycles. So it's kind of funny because one of the things, and I'm sure every class does this. I do this when I teach accounting classes. I do this when I teach human resources classes. Every single manager has a piece of the action of what I'm doing or what somebody else is doing within that organization. So, for example, if I'm dealing with an operations manager, part of his job is dealing with the accounting department. Part of his job is dealing with the human resources department, because that's just something we have to do. We have to manage resources. And so it's very important that we actually do that. And I know some of you are in this class probably aren't going to become human resource personnel, but I guarantee you're always going to have an opportunity to interact with the human resource department. And I can guarantee you that right now, because when you get hired, you're hired by a recruiter who's probably working for human resource. I would darn near dollar for donuts, it's going to be that way. When you exit the organization, you're going to receive, hopefully, if the HR person is doing their job, you're going to get an exit interview. And that's going to be another factor that you need to do with that. So one of the things I usually talk about when I deal with this here, they say the role of HRM, keep in mind that the functions are also tasks of other department managers, which makes this information important. So, like I said, we reach into everything. I find it fascinating. When I was actually learning about human resources management many years ago, I learned that in Japanese organizations, actually the most powerful position within the organization was the human resources department, and that's because they got to choose where everybody went. And so, you pretty much had, the control of people's careers based on the needs of the organization. So I thought that was always kind of fascinating. And the other thing I like to do is I like to separate out the roles of HRM versus HRD. Human resource management is sort of the day-to-day kind of stuff that gets done, kind of the stuff that Jack Welch was talking about, making sure that birthdays are announced, making sure that paperwork is done correctly, W-4s are filled out correctly, employment authorizations are done correctly. There's a management aspect of that, but then there's also the human resource development, which is more kind of consulting type work, which is what I really enjoy doing, where we do a lot of training and development of individuals. And I would say that pretty much any HR role can have aspects of both, and it depends on how involved you want to get on the other side. I've seen some people who are like, look, I just want to deal with laws, I want to deal with papers, I want to make sure everything is neat and orderly, and that's all I want to do. I don't care about training people. I'm not interested in training people, and if you're not interested in training people, it's fine. There's other people out there that'll be happy to do that. So both functions are necessary, both functions are important, and if we do those functions correctly, it can actually help the organization. So one of the things, then they talk a little bit about staffing, developing a staffing plan, and I really wish that they would have, the one thing I do wish that they had done is talked about strategy at that point. And part of the reason why is, and we'll talk about this when we get to chapter 2, but strategic management is sort of your foundation of your building, if you think about it. And I don't make light of that. Strategic management really, and if we were in class, I don't have a whiteboard here, or else I would go ahead and do that for you. But the way I draw it is I draw a big, huge block, and I label it strategic management. On top of that, I draw a little smaller block, but just as, a little less wide, and I label it diversity. And then on top of that, we kind of put the pillars of each of the functions, recruiting, selection, training and development, and safety, and so on and so forth. And the reason why we do that is you have to have that solid foundation. If you don't have a good strategic plan, it's impossible to build a good diversity plan. And if you don't build a good diversity plan, you're going to have a very hard time really succeeding in your recruiting and in your training, because then all you're basically doing is saying, I got a hole, I got to plug the hole, and that's all I'm going to do. That's not really very strategic thinking, and as a result of which you could end up with bigger problems than it's worth. So that's kind of how I think of this, the whole process. They get into, they talk here a little bit about developing a staffing plan, developing priorities, and we'll talk a little bit more in detail about this when we get to the chapter. I believe it's chapter 4 for recruitment. But when we talk about the staffing plan, we have the overall organizational strategic plan. But then each of your pillars that you're going to have has its own plan also. So you're going to have a recruiting plan, you're going to have a selection plan, you're going to have a plan for training and development, you're going to have a plan for safety. But those plans need to feed off of the strategic plan and the diversity. Diversity is not a pillar. Diversity is a foundation, because if you don't have good diversity in your organization, I don't care what your thoughts process is on it. I've seen where bad diversity ends up really killing the organization. So we want to make sure that we're doing that and keeping it going well. Development of workplace policies. This is where they kind of talk about discipline process policies. Discipline process policies, for example, if what happens if an employee shows up late to work. What it does is, what the discipline process policies are really about is they're trying to sort of level the field, make things a little more mechanical. And I always say, both when you get into law, but also when you get into human resources, there's sort of the facts and circumstances actions that we take, and then there's the mechanical actions that we take. There's certain things that we're going to do that's just mechanical. Very good example: if you work at my CPA firm and I catch you stealing, you're fired. There's nothing I can do for you. Because that's an integrity issue. I cannot have people working on financial statements who don't have integrity. That's just an automatic terminable offense. If you're caught, cheating, that technically could be a terminable offense. But again, that's more facts and circumstances, because obviously we don't want cheaters on there. But if for example, if somebody because there's cheating, which is failing to do proper procedures in order to get something done, and then there's taking a shortcut that actually ends up making the process more efficient. So you kind of have to examine those things, and so that's kind of the difference between facts and circumstances and stealing. I can't think of a thing where in an accounting firm stealing makes sense. I can't. Vacation time policy. One of the things that I've noticed is that a lot of organizations have begun moving away from they used to have sick time and then vacation time. And vacation time you could take anytime you wanted to go do whatever you wanted. Sick time was really reserved primarily for sick days. And I remember the last organization I worked at that had that, it actually created a problem for me, because when I wanted to leave, there were a couple times that I took vacation days accidentally and didn't take the sick days, because I don't think I was properly trained on which one was which, and I didn't know that sick days couldn't be used for whatever. So what I ended up doing was that I ended up taking, some days to get some doctor appointments out. So when I went to my next job, it wasn't going to be a big deal, but you could tell that the organization, it was just kind of like, sick days versus vacation days. Most companies are getting away from it, and they've just decided, hey, look, what we're going to do, we're just going to go ahead and we're going to do this thing called PTO, which is just paid time off. Whether you're sick, whether you're going on vacation, it's all the same. So that's kind of important. Dress code. This can be I've seen where dress code has actually been used as an employee benefit. Working in the accounting industry, many accounting firms used to make people wear, I remember, the good old days, and, when there was, the Big Eight, PwC used to require people to wear blue suits, when they went to work. Those days are pretty much gone now, though. Unless you're a partner, or a high-level manager, you're probably not going to wear a suit unless you're going to go out and visit a client. And even when I was at the Big Four and I visited clients, most of the time I just wore, like the golf shirt and casual slacks that I wore. Nobody expected me to be super dressed up, especially for some of the clients that I had. Ethics policies. Ethics policies are really important because I would say ethics policies also really tie into your core cultural of your organization. One of the things that I've noticed with the when we start talking about ethics policies is defining what's right and wrong, and how are we going to source our values of our organization. So very good example there, and don't get me started on this topic, we'll be here for the next 10 hours. But what's ethical? If I'm a hedonist, ethical is whatever I like. If I'm a utilitarianist, I'm going to do what maximizes the most amount of good. That doesn't sound so bad, but then, one thing that you begin to realize is, if I'm going to maximize the amount of good, what I'm going to do is I'm going to fire 20 people over here with the intention of hiring 200 over here, but I'm going to pay them 1/3 less. Okay, well, I'm going to pay them, a fraction less than I would pay these 20 over here. Are you really causing the most good? And then the question is, what's good? How do you define good? So you can see where it can get very perilous when you're starting to talk about ethics and the sources of our ethics and where that's kind of important. I would say ethics statements are, I've heard of stories and I've read about stories where, it's a make or break in trial. Where people, if they don't they don't have a good ethics policy, if they have a good ethics policy, sometimes they can use that in the court case saying, this is our ethics, and yeah, we do it. And here's a climate survey that we did that actually says we're pretty much sticking to that. This person who's accusing us of bad things, not true. So that can actually kind of help you out a lot. Internet usage policy. I remember in the good old days when, T1, offices would have T1 and the and homes still had dial-up. I'm really dating myself. I remember, what was it, 28.8 and 56.6. And, so people wanted to do online shopping. And so what would end up, that's kind of where the whole Cyber Monday came from, because what would happen is people would spend the Monday after the 4-day weekend. After you got done with the 4-day weekend, it's hard to get back to work. So a lot of people were just doing their cyber shopping for their Christmas, and that's why Cyber Monday kind of became very popular, because the organization had all this, this internet speed, because it, it was necessary for a business. Not probably as important nowadays. A lot of people have high-speed internet in their homes. It's not, I get, files for what, like $40 some odd a month. Back then, I remember if you wanted high-speed broadband internet, it was like $120 a month minimum. So it's a much different situation. But of course, you want your policies to be set correctly so that people don't they don't abuse it, you know. And the biggest concern that, of course, we have is that somebody's going to get on there and start downloading stuff that's, you know, not suitable for work. NSFW, you know, we definitely don't want that kind of stuff happening. Talking about compensation and benefits administration, this is an area that I'm really passionate about because I have a lot of experience in it, both from the accounting perspective and also from the human resource perspective. First of all, health benefits. Health benefits are something that we can offer employees. It's actually what you know, it's a double benefit, so to speak, where the company gets to pay for the health of the employee. You know, usually when they buy in group plans, they're going to get them cheaper. And then what ends up happening is that when the company spends money on the plan, they get a tax deduction off of it. And then when they give it to the employee does not have to pick that up as extra income. So it's almost like tax-free income for the employee. So that's a great thing. Pay is just basically handing money to the employee for compensation of their to their labor. It's all do re mi and focus on me. Okay, so that's kind of what we do with that. 401k retirement plans, 401k retirement plans are what we call defined contribution plans, where the employee actually puts compensation into their retirement plan or to save for retirement. Companies, of course, are moving towards that because they're much cheaper than the converse side, where they talk about defined benefit plans, which is kind of your pension systems. I think the only people who tend to get those nowadays is government workers, and military, of course, and then union workers. A lot of unions are still offering pensions. And then we talked a little bit about vacation time and sick leave. Vacation time, like I said, they're kind of merging these two together into PTO. And so, instead of vacation time and sick time, where I have to decide, am I going to go on vacation? Am I using sick? And then there's some times where, you're like, well, I'm doing a surgery, but it's not really, maybe it's a little bit of elective surgery. So am I using sick time or victim? They're just moving away from that. They're just deciding, hey, we're just going to do PTO. It's not anything that they're going to worry about on that. Bonuses, once again, that's kind of with the cash or do re mi, emphasis on me, paying me for all that stuff. Tuition reimbursement. This is actually a benefit that I see going away. At least it's not as juicy as it used to be. Before the recent Tax Act was passed, companies would be able to give the tuition benefit to the employee, sort of with this idea that you can go to college. We'll pay for your college up to how much ever. When I worked at one company, they paid for me to go to college. They paid $10,000 a year for me to go to college, and then what would happen is, under the law, the old law, it used to be $5,280 was then not included in the employee's income to them. So the employer would get to deduct the whole $10,000. I would only have to recognize any income above $5,280. And so it ended up working out really, really well for me because, it was a smaller amount of income hit as a result of it, but I got to increase my skills, help the organization, and get better at my job, which ended up really working out. So moving into the next area where we talk about retention. Obviously, with retention, there's a few interesting things about this. Where I love where they have this. Where 90% of employees leave the company for the following reasons: the job they're performing. Maybe we brought them in to do one job, now they're doing another job. What I call job creep, where people just their jobs change because of changing landscapes, and now they're doing a job they don't enjoy anymore, or even worse, they're doing the job that they want to do, but it's under circumstances that they don't want to do it. Challenges with their manager. This is what most people think causes people to leave, but it oftentimes isn't always just the challenge of the manager. And then there's poor fit with organizational culture, and then poor workplace environment. And I've seen people stick around because of a poor fit with organizational culture, and they're just miserable. And then eventually they leave, they move on to something else, and 4 or 5 months later you talk to them and they're happy as a clam. That's usually what ends up happening with a lot of that. And believe me, look, I've been laid off before. My wife's been laid off before. I've seen how that is. Changing jobs is not an easy thing, and I'm not trying to make light of it, but sometimes it just ends up being better for both parties involved. Training and development, like I said, this is kind of what I enjoy a little bit more of, where we can train obviously job skills. We can do training on communication. So I like to have, the hard skills, what you need in order to do your job. And then there's other things where soft skills is just kind of make you a better member of the organization. And, one of the cool things about doing this within the organization is I can bring that within, the organization's, within the organization and make my training custom to the organization. So if I can integrate its culture and all that stuff. And then of course we have policy, legal training such as sexual harassment, ethics. Yeah, I mean, especially in the Me Too movement, sexual harassment is getting a lot of focus, and that focus comes right back on us. Got to make sure we're doing good training, we have solid policies developed, and that we're preventing people from getting away from this disgusting behavior. So we also have dealing with laws affecting employment, discrimination laws, healthcare requirements, worker safety laws. Again, getting back to what I think of as a very important part. Compensation requirements with the minimum wage. We'll talk about FLSA, which is the Fair Labor Standards Act. Under the old system, you used to have to, you had to pay people, I think it was like $495 a week or $22,500 a year. And if it didn't work out that way, what would end up happening is you had to pay them an hourly rate, and then that hourly rate had a minimum rate. Whereas if you could get them to the exempt, you could work unlimited hours. You're just getting a flat salary. That kind of was changed a little bit in 2014. The previous administration tried to change things, and then there was some confusion about it. And I'll be honest, this is probably an area I need to refresh myself in, because it seems like every time I look into it, something else is going on. So it's a fascinating area, and it's a great time to be involved with human resources just for that reason. Then you have labor laws. We have obviously my favorite thing to talk about is the child labor laws. Of course, we don't do that anymore. But the reason why I think it's a good thing to talk about, it reminds me of when I was a kid. I was trying at the age of 14 to go work for the Wendy's Corporation, and they, even in South Dakota, you want to talk about middle of the country. They were like, yeah, we're not going to touch you because you're not 16, and that's kind of what we would want you to be at. Kind of broke my heart. I really like Wendy's, and I eventually went to go work for McDonald's as a teenager, and the rest, they say, is history. Worker protection, we talk about this is where we get back into the safety, for the most part safety. I mean, when we talk about chemical hazards and heating and ventilation requirements, obviously safety is a big thing there. No fragrance zones. This is a thing that has really sort of expanded lately. I didn't really remember too much of this until later on when I got into the military. I used to wear Drakkar Noir, Obsession. I was really into that, and when I was a lot younger. And then later on, what ended up happening is I went to go work at an organization because it was within the military, and there was a civilian worker who was allergic to a lot of it, and so I ended up having to stop wearing it. In fact, I haven't worn it probably since then. I think I have a bottle of it somewhere around here, but it's just something I've just not done anymore because I've gotten used to not doing it. But sometimes the fragrance zones can actually create a massive problem for people, especially those who have health issues. Protection of private employee information. I can say 3 letters to all you government guys out there: PII, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. Personally identifiable information. You have to protect it. I mean, it's almost getting to the point where PII is almost as valuable as classified nowadays. You mess up classified, you go to jail. You mess up with PII, same thing could probably happen if it's for the wrong things. Then they talk about a lot of the external factors. I'm not going to go over too many of these. We'll talk about this when we get into the respective chapters. Globalization and offshoring is probably the biggest one. That's what I see most of all, mostly because I do international tax as a concentration of my firm. But then also diversity of the workforce is becoming far more of a focus. Layoffs and downsizing. The hardest thing that you're ever going to do in the HR world is lay somebody off. I've been laid off. My wife was laid off about a year ago, and then of course she found another job. And it's hard because sometimes you're laying people off and you can't tell them the reason why. And it's not even due to performance. It's just, like in both my wife and my case, it was because the company was being sold and they couldn't announce it to anybody. They were just saying, hey, we're just going to lay off, 20% of the workforce. They laid me off because I'd only been there for a couple months or a few months, and it was just easy to let me go as opposed to keeping people, letting go of people who had been there for many, many years. Increased use of social networking to distribute information to employees. That's a double-edged sword, but we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get there. Then there's a few diagrams that you can take a look at. I won't get into that because just more or less because of time. Okay, skills needed for HRM. And that's where we kind of talk a little bit about the professional skills needed to be in HR, be successful in HRM, and then also define the human resource management and certifications that can be done in the profession. So the skills, it comes down to people. You got to be able to relate to people. You got to be able to work with people. You've got to be able to help people become successful in everything that they need to do. So we want to make sure that gets taken care of and everything's working right. They talk about here that you need organization skills. I don't know. I'm a pretty disorganized kind of person, and I seem to do all right with it. But of course, organization skills can't hurt. Ethics and the sense of fairness, minimum required. If people have no trust in you or have no faith in you, you're done. Employers aren't going to hire you, and employees will never trust you. Then we kind of get down to where we talk about some of the certifications, and that's where I'm going to kind of introduce you guys to a little bit of a situation that we have here. Within the certifications area, there's actually we're getting the dust settling from the war that kind of was going on. The Society for Human Resource Management and the Human Resource Certification Institute, we're kind of having this big battle, and I don't know the whole background about it. I'm not going to relitigate it and all that sort of stuff. But the end result was the HRCI, which had the old, certifications. They're still offering them, obviously, and they're more developed, they're more well known, and so many people still have them. But there's a lot of people that are swapping over to the SHRM certifications, and SHRM made this really easy because they said, look, if you're a PHR, we'll let you go to our SHRM CP. If you're an SPHR, we'll let you come to our SCP, and you have like a 4-year time window. If you don't do it within the 4 years, we're gonna make you take the test again. And that was enough to get enough people to suck in to go do it, and especially because most people are part of SHRM anyways. And so it ends up actually working out a lot better for people to continue doing that. The Professional Human Resources certification is actually what I used to have. Now I've got the SHRM CP. Basically what it is that, it's for what a generalist would need in order to be successful in the organization. The Senior Professional Human Resources is more focused on strategy, strategic management, and they're kind of talking, more to the senior executive levels. I plan on doing my senior SHRM SCP test when things kind of settle down a little bit with the start of my company and all that. The Global Professional and Human Resources, the GPHR is really it's an exam for professionals to perform any global level tasks or go across borders. Very important. I'm a member of the Global Certification, Global Council on. Oh gosh, I'm even forgetting it. It's the global group, as I'll call it, GRCI. So they're really GCRI. Yeah. Anyways. Boy, I'm really messing that one up. I hope none of them are watching this when I see this today. But it's a group that really focuses on global immigration, both into the United States, outside of the United States. We actually got to do some time where we got to go lobby Congress to increase the number of visas and increase the number of immigration that was coming in today. And we lobbied both Republican side, Democrat side, tried to get people to do this. And so I think it's going to work out. It just, we got to get past this election, and hopefully they can to start doing that, because what we're noticing is that there's a lot of jobs out there where we just don't have any people who can fill it. And there's plenty of people outside of the United States that can fill those jobs. Now, of course, I would rather, have us, well, let's just train those individuals and we can see if we can, bring those people up. But some of these skills are skills that take years to develop, and we just don't have the time in order to be able to do a lot of that. So, I know it's a controversial area right now, immigration, but because I do a lot of international tax, and then of course I also work with this council, the Global Council on Immigration. It's really one that I'm very passionate about. So then they talk about what kind of job titles you could have within the, I'm not going to go a lot with these, except for I want to talk a little bit about the work-life coordinator. This is kind of a job that's come about recently. I think it's a great thing because and actually I want to say we've got to thank the millennials and the Gen Ys about this, because they're the ones who kind of came up, and as they were coming up, they're like, look, I saw my parents work themselves crazy. Mom and dad got divorced. I don't want that for me. I want to have, I want to work. I want to come home. I want to have a life. I want to do all that stuff. So, this work-life coordinator is sort of this job that sprung up as a result of it. Great opportunity if that's something that interests you. All right. So today's challenges, basically the challenges that we have are varied. The number one, of course, is containing costs. We have to contain costs, and I'll tell you, as a bean counter, I get this, but and also as an HR person, I get the flip side of this. Probably the biggest thing that we want to do, as an HR person, I want to offer the best of everything, right? I want to offer the biggest salaries. I want to offer the biggest health care plan. I want to offer the biggest, fringe benefit package, and that kind of gets back to our original ideas in economics, where we have unlimited wants, limited resources. And so the bean counters are kind of keeping us in check with this. But, with skyrocketing healthcare costs, that's been happening for the past, 10, 15 years. Skyrocketing, and then training costs, and then the question is, do we train locally? Do we send everybody, to meet to a one designated spot? One of the things that's really helped with training costs, of course, is the telecommunications industry. It's really, helped out with a lot of that. And then hiring process costs, as databases become more integrated with the organization and job descriptions are more sophisticated. I think that there's a lot of cost involved with the hiring, and I can't remember. Someone once told me that there was and this figure changes all the time. They say it costs 3 times as much to hire somebody as it does to retain someone. So obviously we want to keep people if it's entirely possible, but then there's sometimes where it works out better not to. There's different ways that we can cut those costs, shifting some of the costs to the employees, reducing the benefits, or changing and negotiating plans with the healthcare costs. With healthcare, I think it's a really good thing, because one of the things that the employer can say is, look, I'm going to buy your healthcare package, and I'm going to bring 300 people in order to go do that. So you can negotiate a pretty good cost if you're bringing in a lot of employees. If you have a small shop like I do, where it's like, five employees, good luck getting a great price. We just don't have, and that's why people in the accounting industry tend to band together and get health insurance that way. Then we have technology. Technology is giving us some challenges, but it's also giving us some areas of opportunity. I would say the best part about the technology area, we have like I said, the database integration that happens between recruiting, retention, and all these other different HR functions, but more importantly with operations, with accounting. And so that integration that tends to happen allows us to be able to keep things moving, we're all on one page. That's a very good thing. But the disadvantage, of course, is technology can also get us into some trouble, as we'll talk about a little bit later on. multicultural diversity and multiculturalism within technology also creates an issue because there's certain aspects of this population that just can't afford to get into some of the technology that really is starting to become required in order to be able to get some of the higher level jobs. And so but that's more of a macro country, national problem as opposed to a country problem. The bad news is the country suffers with it. So the economy, oftentimes when we're talking about the economy, we think of the good stuff and the bad stuff. In tough times, I'll tell you what, and I think I've said this in the past, I've been laid off because my company was bought out. I wasn't told that. I was just basically brought into the room. They said, "Kevin, we're going to have to let you go." I had only been there for a few months. I thought, is this because of me? And they said, "No, it's absolutely not." And then once I found out the company was being bought, I went back to them and said, "Was this the reason why?" They said, "Yes, because we told you that's what it was." Oh, we didn't tell you that's what it was, but we told you it wasn't because of your performance. And at first I was a little bit disappointed about it, but then I ended up landing somewhere that actually to this day, I've been very happy to have had the experience that I've had since then. So, we talk about, the economy, and getting back to what Jock Welch said about, in the economy, I think that, when you have a good economy, it's easy to just kind of let things slide, but it presents to you with a couple of different problems. In a good economy, it's recruiting and retention that's kind of the big problem. I got to find talent. I've got all these jobs to fill. I can't find any talent because there's not enough people, and the economy is overheating, and people are being, I remember, job hopping once every, year. People would move from one job to the next because, you'd have these headhunters that would come in and, you come over here, we'll offer you 20% more. And what they learned, though, is that some of those people who actually ended up doing that ended up suffering a little bit. So, that's kind of how that ended up working out. When the economy does horrible, obviously that's not good for us. So we, it's not good for the people generally involved, but usually you're ended up doing the what I would call the worst part of HR, which is basically telling people they don't have a job anymore. And obviously when I was laid off, I was in a good industry, and it was good times. I didn't have too much to worry too much about. I played golf for about a month, and then I went back to work after that. It was actually not a bad deal. With my severance pay, I ended up actually getting a 4-week paid vacation, which was nice. But because I work in an industry where my skills are very valuable, so that wasn't too much of a problem. When you have other circumstances where, especially people have extremely specialized skills that may not be as easy. So sometimes you have to do job retraining. Sometimes you offer resume retraining. We're going to help you build your resume. We're going to put you in charge of these, or in touch with these organizations. They're going to find you your next job, and that's always kind of a nice thing to offer to people. But it's stressful because nobody wants to be the person who breaks bad news. I've known some HR people. They just did it all in one day. They did it on Friday, and then they went home and felt bad, but it's part of the job. Let me see. And then we start talking about a lot of the diversity in the economy. The United States economy, diversity-wise, is actually changing quite a bit. We're seeing where Asians are, the population growth is actually exploding, up 43.3% from 2000 to 2010. I'm actually part of the result of that. not the result of it, but I'm part of that because my wife, who's Chinese, moved here, and then we had a son who probably fits the 2 or more races. It's part of that 32%. And then, and then obviously Latino, Hispanic Latino up 43%, Native Hawaiian, other Pacific Islanders up 35.4%. Where we're starting to see a lot of slower growth, of course, is Black or African Americans, and then of course 5.7% for white alone. So that how's that going to change your landscape? What it tells me is that if you go out and you identify what your talent pool is, because that's what diversity cares most about. And when you're trying to figure out your numbers for legal circumstances, it's your talent pool that's more important than the population diversity of the United States, depending on your skills. So for example, if I'm using unskilled labor where anybody can participate, then it's geographic region. Okay, geographic region is my diversity within my geographic region. If it's specialized skills, for example, doctors, then I have to start looking at medical school graduates. What's my diversity like for those people? If it's accountants, I need to find out people who have accounting degrees, who are qualified to sit for the CPA exam. You know, and that's one thing. I'm very proud of my one of my former companies. You know, they noticed that the accountants weren't good, or weren't. I mean, the accounting industry was not very diverse, and so they're going out there and they're trying their best to get that taken care of. So I'm very proud of that and to be a part of that. So I guess that's all I've got. I'm just going to leave it at there. I'm looking forward to this. We're going to try real hard to be putting out these videos more often. Once we get past October 15th, I'll be able to dedicate a little more time to it. And then hopefully we'll get caught up, and then we can get all of the videos out before too long. So if you have any questions for me, reach out to me. If you're in my class, you get on Leo, you'll find my contact information very easily. And if you're not in my class and you want to reach out to me for some other reason, just put a comment in the comment box below, and I'll gladly reach out to you. Anyways, if you have any questions for me, again, contact me. Thank you very much. I hope you have a wonderful day.